It's been a decade since the start of Syria's civil war, and the conflict shows no signs of abating. The Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights has put the death toll at nearly 400,000, including soldiers, militants and civilians, and 22,000 children are amongst the dead. The United Nations Refugee Agency has so far registered nearly 6 million Syrians scattered in neighbouring countries, only 5% of whom live in actual designated refugee camps. And within Syria, at least 6 million civilians are displaced. The UN says by mid-February, a record 12.4 million Syrians, that's nearly 60% of its population, are food insecure. The agency estimates that the cost of reconstruction after the war will be as high as about $250 billion US, and that's 4 times the country's GDP before the war began. Syria's war has left hundreds of thousands of people homeless, struggling to survive in poor living conditions. Our next report gives us a glimpse at how refugees cope with such circumstances.
This is a refugee camp in central Syria. These shabby tents host more than 400 households forcibly displaced due to the war. They're even more poorly equipped inside. But for Abis al-Mahmoud, it's a safe haven for him and his children.
When the rain falls into our tent, we use pots and pans to hold rainwater. When they are full, we pour them out.
The UN High Commissioner for Refugees has been offering relief to this camp. But given the shortages of food and water, the assistance is far from enough.
If we don't get up at 4 a.m. to fetch relief food, we will have nothing to eat the whole day.
Most residents like Habes moved here from Raqban in southern Syria, an informal settlement near the border with Jordan. It's known for extremely dire conditions. As Habes recalls, even water was a luxury.
When we were back in Raqban, there was no water to drink. We could only drink the rainwater in puddles, where you can see insects wriggling.
Located in a U.S. protected zone, Raqban has become home to 12,000 civilians. The Syrian government says it's tried to create a humanitarian corridor to the camp many times, but the efforts have been hampered by U.S.-controlled military forces.
American cars were patrolling around the camp, including off-road vehicles, as well as many cars owned by Syrian opposition forces backed by the U.S. Many tried to persuade us not to leave the refugee camp.
Habes says he risked his life to escape Raqban. But as sanctions on Syria have toughened again, things have become even harder. He said the war took away his normal life for good.
Before the war, we had everything. Heating and public medical services were all free.
Homelessness has been the reality for many Syrians for years. And as the conflict continues, many doubt life will ever return to normal. Gao Yiming, CGTN.
As the world battles COVID-19, even developed countries with access to the highest standard of medical care are experiencing difficulties. So for Syria, devastated by a decade of war, dealing with a pandemic is even more challenging. Mahal Badavid talks to Syrians in Idlib province on what it means to face COVID in a war-stricken area.
At first sight, in the busy streets of Idlib, it's hard to notice the presence of COVID-19. Most locals here are not wearing masks. But the virus is here, and it is spreading across the city and has devastated families. High school student Mohammed lives together with his parents and 2 brothers. He was the first to get infected. A few days later, first his father, then his mother showed symptoms.
It was really difficult. I felt helpless. I was trying to find hospital beds for my family for hours because all the beds in hospitals were full in all of Idlib.
Thankfully, after a painful process, the family was treated and survived.
It was a really nice feeling. I can't describe it in words, especially because it was really tiring during the infection period. We were very tired trying to secure medicine and the necessary materials for my family.
But Mohammed says they still live in fear.
We are constantly exposed to danger here, whether from airstrikes or lack of food or now even viruses and epidemics.
Father of 3, Mohammed is a clothes shop owner in Idlib. He says he's been able to follow preventive measures to keep his family safe.
I'm someone who is at risk because of my work. I deal with many people on a daily basis, but I didn't get the virus, nor did any of my family members, because of the 3 measures we are following: social distancing, wearing masks, and disinfecting our hands.
But for many locals in Idlib, the ongoing fighting is still the biggest threat.
Imagine people are dealing with the virus, but once there's an airstrike about to drop bombs, everything is forgotten, and people only want to protect their family.
Michal Bardavid, CGTN.
Joining us now is Wang Jin, an associate professor with the Institute of Middle Eastern Studies at the Northwestern University of China, and he joins us over Skype from Xi'an. Professor Wang, it's good to see you on the show with us. Oh, we've heard some staggering numbers there in the last few reports, and over the years we've seen some truly heart-wrenching stories, and there has been relative calm and quiet in Syria over the past year, but still no peace settlement. Is there an end in sight soon for Syrians?
I think it is still very far away, because Syria right now still faces a lot of problems, and still there were a lot of obstacles in front of Syria to find the very final and the very internal the settlement ways that ends the years of the decade of the conflicts and the crisis. We see on the one hand that the Syrians' internal conflict and clashes is still far from end. For example, in Idlib, in the northwest of Syria, that the wars is still likely to erupt in the future, and in the other parts of Syria, that some of the extremists and also the terrorists are still there. They are still trying to relaunch the new wave of the contacts, trying to bring Syria back to the unrest. So this is the very first dimension. And the second one is that there was still a lot of interventions from external world. For example, from the United States, from the European, and from Turkey and other key players in the Syria issue. And they have different interests, they have different concerns. It's very hard to try to bring them together to end their interventions into the Syria. And I think if we look at the third dimension, I think is a very economic and social dimension, because for the Syrian government and the local administration inside Syria, they have economic difficulties, they have the social management difficulties. These difficulties will become the future obstacles for the Syrian problem settlements. So, Jiaoyang, a lot of things, a lot of difficulties, lots of obstacles ahead, needs urgent international support and assistance. Jiaoyang.
You did say there that so many countries dragged into Syria's war, and in terms of the U.S., what can we expect from the new administration strategy for Syria and the Middle East?
I think it means we might expect something, but determined by Washington, determined by the United States, because the United States still have their military presence inside Syria, for example, in the northern Syria and also in the southern part, in the border area between Syria and Jordan. So United States can do something. And meanwhile, the United States is still imposing sanctions against the Syrian government. As we know, the Syrian government actually right now controls the majority parts of Syrian territories, that given that the United States give the sanctions to the Syrian government, it's very hard for the ordinary Syrian people to get the international assistance and the support. So I think the United States can do a lot of things and can do something at least, but they're determined by what the United States want and what the United States willingness in this region. So I think United States needs to think about it, needs to consider it carefully. Jiaoyang.
And Professor Wang, what's the impact of COVID-19 on Syria, and how much could this set the country back? The infrastructure, poor infrastructure aside, there's also massive economic problems in the country. How does it even procure medical supplies and vaccinations?
Yes, Jiang, you are right. The coronavirus is very impressive threat for the Syrian country, because as you say that it not only gives the new pressure to the very poor, the health infrastructure and the economic situation there, but also it means that the more people, they need very urgent treatment, they need more medicines, they need more the health care. So it's become the very new problem. And also, I think another dimension of the coronavirus is that it's highlight or the intensify the very tension between the Syrian government and the West, because we know there were sanctions from the United States against the Syrian government, and it means that there were many limitations and many problems for the external supporters. Hope that with the hope of the helping and assisting the Syrian ordinary people. So if the West, especially the United States, they can do something. They can, for example, they can lift these sanctions. It will make things very different. It will the Syrian situation, especially the health situation that fighting against the coronavirus much more easier. Jiayang.
All right, well, Professor Wang, thanks so much once again for joining us on Global Watch. Just really appreciate your insights and your time. That's Wang Jin with the Institute of Middle Eastern Studies at the Northwest University of China.